I gave up on the blind date. Until the new Apache girl next door called out my name, he sat alone at the small diner table, staring at the empty chair across from him. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second feeling heavier than the last. He had arrived 10 minutes early, just like he always did. He believed being on time showed respect. Now almost 40 minutes had passed and the seat in front of him was still empty. He checked his phone again. No new messages, no missed calls. The screen reflected his face, tired eyes, a forced calm that hid quiet disappointment. This blind date was arranged by a coworker who insisted it would be different this time. He hadn't been excited, but he agreed anyway. Saying no felt easier than being alone, or at least that's what he told himself. The waitress walked by for the third time and offered a polite smile. There was kindness in her eyes, mixed with understanding. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. People who work late nights in diners learn to read situations quickly. He gave a small nod, silently telling her he was fine, even though he wasn't sure if that was true. He looked around the diner. A couple laughed quietly in a corner booth. Two old men argued about a sports game near the counter. Life was moving normally for everyone else. For him, it felt like time had paused just to remind him of how often things didn't work out. He thought about how this all started. The phone call earlier that week. The encouragement. "Just try one more time," his coworker said. "You never know." He did know, though. He always knew how these things ended. Awkward introductions, forced smiles, polite goodbyes, or worse, nothing at all like tonight. He took a deep breath and folded the napkin on the table slowly, carefully, as if that small action could give him control over the moment. He wasn't angry. He was past that stage. He felt something quieter, heavier. The kind of disappointment that doesn't shout, just sits with you. Finally, he stood up. His legs felt stiff, like he had been sitting much longer than he had. He walked to the counter and paid for the coffee he barely touched. The waitress told him to have a good night. He thanked her and meant it. Small kindnesses mattered more when expectations failed. Outside, the air was cool and calm. The parking lot lights buzzed softly overhead. He unlocked his truck and sat inside for a moment before starting the engine. He rested his forehead against the steering wheel and closed his eyes. Not because he was overwhelmed, but because he was tired, tired of hoping, tired of trying to make things happen. As he drove home, the road was quiet. Streetlights passed by in steady rhythm. He kept the radio off. Silence felt better than noise tonight. His thoughts wandered without direction. He wondered when he started feeling like every attempt at connection was more effort than reward. He remembered a time when he believed meeting someone would just happen naturally. No plans, no pressure. Somewhere along the way, that belief faded. Life got busy. Responsibilities piled up. People drifted in and out. He learned how to be independent, how to rely on himself. Maybe too well. His house came into view at the end of the street. The porch light was off, just like he left it. He parked the truck and sat there again, keys still in his hand. Going inside meant ending the night completely. Outside, there was still a chance of what he didn't know. He stepped out and stretched his back, feeling the tension he carried all evening. The neighborhood was quiet. Most houses were dark. Then he noticed something different next door. A large moving truck was parked in the driveway beside his house. Its back door was open, and light spilled out onto the ground. Boxes were stacked unevenly. A few items were scattered near the porch, as if someone had been unloading in a hurry. He frowned slightly. The house next door had been empty for months. He hadn't heard anything about new neighbors. He assumed whoever moved in would do it during the day, not late at night. He walked toward his front door but slowed down. A soft sound caught his attention, the sound of something being dragged, then a quiet sigh, the kind someone makes when they are struggling but don't want to complain. He glanced over. A young woman stood near the truck, trying to carry a box that looked heavier than it should be. Her movements were careful, steady, but it was clear she was pushing herself. He hesitated. He didn't want to intrude. After the night he had, the last thing he wanted was an awkward interaction. But something about the scene didn't sit right with him. It was late. She was alone. And that box looked like it might slip. Before he could decide, the box tilted. She adjusted her grip quickly, keeping it from falling. Still, the effort showed on her face. He took a few steps closer and cleared his throat gently. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice calm. "Do you need a hand with that?" She looked up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Her eyes met his, steady and alert. There was no surprise in her expression, no confusion, no hesitation. Instead, there was recognition. She straightened slightly, still holding the box, and then she said his name. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly, like she had said it before. He felt his breath catch. His mind searched quickly through memories, faces, places. He was certain he had never met her. He would have remembered. "That's me," he said slowly, "but I think you might have me confused with someone else." She smiled softly as if she expected that answer. "No," she said, "I'm sure." He stood there, unsure what to do next. The night felt suddenly different, charged with something he couldn't explain. A few minutes ago, he felt invisible. Now, a stranger knew his name. He reached for the box without thinking. "Let me take that," he said. She allowed him, and he noticed how light her hands felt when she let go, how careful she was, as if she didn't want to impose. As he carried the box toward the porch, his thoughts raced. How did she know him? Who was she? And why did this moment feel more important than it should? He placed the box down gently. When he turned back, she was watching him closely, not with curiosity, but with something deeper, respect maybe, gratitude or memory. "Thanks," she said. "I didn't expect help tonight." He shrugged lightly. "Moving alone is rough, especially this late," she nodded. "It was a long drive." They stood there, the quiet between them not uncomfortable, just full. Crickets chirped somewhere nearby. The moving truck hummed softly. He was about to ask her how she knew his name, but the question stayed in his throat. Something told him the answer wouldn't be simple. Earlier that night, he believed the day was over. The blind date was done. The disappointment settled. He had given up on the idea that anything meaningful could still happen before morning. Standing there now, under the dim porch light, he realized he might have been wrong. And he didn't know yet that this unexpected moment, this single word spoken by a stranger, was already changing the direction of his life. He stood there for a moment after setting the box down, still trying to understand what had just happened. The night felt different now, like something unseen had shifted. He glanced at the moving truck again, then back at her. The porch light from her house flickered slightly, casting soft shadows across her face. "I'm your neighbor," she said calmly, as if that explained everything. "I just moved in today." "That part I figured out," he replied with a small, polite smile. "But the name thing, that caught me off guard." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped toward the porch and adjusted one of the boxes, making sure it wouldn't tip over. Her movements were careful and respectful, like she was used to taking responsibility without complaint. When she finally turned back to him, her expression was open but thoughtful. "My grandmother talked about you," she said. "For many years." He frowned slightly. "Your grandmother?" she nodded. "Yes, she lived a few hours from here on Apache land. She passed away last winter." "I'm sorry," he said without hesitation. The words came naturally. "Thank you," she replied. She was strong, stronger than most people. They stood in silence again. The air was cool, carrying the smell of dust and distant trees. He tried to connect the dots in his mind. He didn't spend much time talking about his past, but he knew there were moments he had forgotten that might have stayed with others. "I'm trying to remember," he said honestly. "I don't want to sound rude, but I don't recall meeting your grandmother." She smiled gently, not offended at all. "You wouldn't. You helped her once, a long time ago. You probably thought nothing of it." That bothered him more than if she had accused him of forgetting. He believed small actions mattered, but he never imagined they could travel so far, carry a name with them, and return years later in the form of a stranger next door. He leaned against the railing, listening carefully. "What kind of help?" She took a breath, as if choosing her words with care. Her truck broke down during a storm. No cell signal. No one stopped for a long time. "You did." The memory hit him slowly, a flash of rain. Mud on the road. An older woman sitting calmly beside a broken-down vehicle, refusing to panic. He remembered lending tools, waiting until the engine cooled, calling for help once they reached signal range. "I remember the storm," he said quietly. "I remember her." Her eyes softened. "She spoke about you like you were family." That made his chest feel tight in a way he didn't expect. He had done that once on instinct without thinking it was special. To hear it mattered so deeply to someone else made him question how many other moments he had overlooked in his own life. "I'm Lena," she said, extending her hand. He shook it gently. "Good to meet you, Lena." Her handshake was firm but warm. There was confidence there, not arrogance, just quiet certainty. They moved a few more boxes together, working side by side without much talk. It felt natural. He noticed how she thanked him every time, even for small things. He noticed how she placed items carefully, like she respected every object, every space. "You don't have to help with everything," she said after a while. "You've already done a lot." He shrugged. "I don't mind. It's better than sitting alone." The words slipped out before he could stop them. He expected her to ask questions, but she didn't. She just nodded, as if she understood without needing details. Once the truck was mostly unloaded, they sat on the porch steps to rest. The night had grown quieter. A dog barked somewhere far away. The street felt peaceful, like it was holding its breath. "So," she said after a moment, "long day." He laughed softly. "That's one way to put it." She waited, giving him space. He appreciated that more than she knew. "I had a blind date," he admitted. "Didn't show up." She didn't react with pity or surprise. "That happens," she said simply. "Does it?" "Yes," she replied. "But it doesn't always mean something went wrong. Sometimes it just means something else was supposed to happen." He looked at her then, really looked at her. There was no judgment in her voice, just acceptance. It felt like a weight lifting from his shoulders. "I almost didn't come home right away," he said. "I sat in my truck for a long time." She smiled faintly. "Then I'm glad you did." They talked more after that, about the neighborhood, about work, about adjusting to new places. She told him she was there to start fresh, to be closer to a community her grandmother trusted. He told her he had lived there for years, mostly keeping to himself. "You don't seem like someone who keeps to himself," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "Why do you say that?" "Because you help without being asked," she replied. "People like that usually care more than they admit." That made him quiet. He wasn't used to being seen so clearly. As the night stretched on, he realized he wasn't thinking about the blind date anymore. The disappointment had faded, replaced by curiosity and calm. This conversation felt easy, unforced. There were pauses, but they weren't awkward. They were comfortable. Eventually, she stood up. "I should get inside, big day tomorrow." "Of course," he said. "If you need anything, just knock." "I will," she replied. "And thank you, not just for tonight, for back then too." He watched as she went inside and turned on the light. The door closed gently behind her. He stayed on his porch for a long time after that, staring at the quiet street. The night that had started with disappointment ended with something he couldn't quite name yet. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't hope exactly. It was the feeling that life had just opened a door he didn't know existed. And this time, he didn't feel like walking away. The next morning, he woke earlier than usual. Sunlight slipped through the thin gap in his curtains, landing across the wall. For a moment, he lay still, listening to the quiet sounds of the neighborhood waking up. A car passed in the distance. A bird landed on the fence outside. Everything felt normal, yet something inside him felt different. He thought about the night before. About the failed blind date that no longer felt important. About the moving truck, the boxes, and the way Lena had said his name with such certainty. He had met many people in his life, but very few moments stayed with him the way that one had. He got out of bed and went through his usual routine, but his mind kept drifting. He poured coffee and stood by the kitchen window looking toward the house next door. The truck was gone now. The driveway was empty. The house no longer looked abandoned. It looked lived in. Later that afternoon, as he returned from work, he noticed her sitting on the front steps next door. She had a small notebook in her lap and a cup of tea beside her. She looked up when she heard his truck and smiled, not in a big way, just enough to show recognition. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he replied, surprised at how natural it felt to say it. He hesitated, then walked over. "Settling in okay?" "Yes," she said. "Still a lot to unpack, but I'm getting there." They talked casually for a few minutes, about the weather, about how quiet the street was, simple things. Still, he felt like there was more waiting beneath the surface, something unspoken from the night before. After a short pause, she closed her notebook. "Do you have time to walk a bit?" she asked. "Just around the block." "Sure," he said. "I could use the fresh air." They walked slowly, side by side, not rushing. The street was lined with old trees, their leaves moving gently in the breeze. As they walked, she told him more about her grandmother, about how she was a storyteller, how she believed every person entered your life for a reason. "She used to say that kindness doesn't disappear," Lena said. "It travels. Sometimes it sleeps for years. Then it shows up when you need it most." He listened carefully. "I didn't realize helping her meant that much." "She never forgot," Lena replied. "When I told her I was thinking about moving here, she smiled. She said, 'Go where the man who stopped for me lives. That place has good people.'" He felt a lump form in his throat. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "That's why it mattered," she said. "You did it without expecting anything." They reached the corner and turned back. The silence between them wasn't empty. It felt full of shared understanding. As the days passed, they saw each other often. Sometimes it was just a wave from across the yard. Other times, it turned into long talks on the porch or short walks in the evening. Nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt forced. He learned that Lena had lived in several places before coming here. She had always felt between worlds, not fully belonging anywhere. Her grandmother's land was the only place that ever felt like home, but life had pulled her away. "I wanted to start over," she said one evening as they sat on his porch steps. "Somewhere quiet, somewhere honest." He nodded. "This place is good for that." She looked at him. "You don't talk much about yourself." He smiled slightly. "There's not much to say." "I don't believe that," she replied. He thought for a moment, then spoke. "I've spent most of my life doing what needed to be done. Work, responsibilities, helping where I can. Somewhere along the way, I stopped expecting much in return." "That's not a bad thing," she said. "No," he agreed, "but it gets lonely." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked out at the street, then back at him. "Loneliness doesn't mean you're broken," she said. "Sometimes it just means you've been strong for too long." Those words stayed with him. One afternoon, she invited him over for tea. Her house still smelled like cardboard and fresh paint. Boxes were stacked neatly against the walls, labeled carefully. It felt personal already, like she was shaping the space slowly, thoughtfully. They sat at the small kitchen table. She poured the tea and asked about his family. He told her about growing up nearby, about losing people along the way, about learning to stand on his own. She listened without interrupting, without trying to fix anything. "I think people forget how powerful listening is," she said softly. He smiled. "You're good at it." She shrugged. "My grandmother taught me." As weeks passed, trust grew quietly between them. There were no big promises, no dramatic moments, just consistency, shared meals, comfortable silences, laughter that came easily. He noticed how she respected boundaries, how she never pushed for more than he was ready to give. And slowly, he found himself opening up without fear. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, they sat together watching the sky change colors. "I almost didn't move here," she admitted. "What changed your mind?" he asked. She looked at him, her stories, and a feeling I couldn't explain. He nodded. "I almost didn't come home that night." She smiled gently. "Funny how close we come to missing things." He realized then that this connection wasn't loud or dramatic. It was steady, real, built on respect and shared values. The blind date that once felt like a failure now felt like a turning point. If it hadn't gone wrong, he might never have met her. If he hadn't felt disappointed, he might not have noticed the moving truck or stopped to help. Life didn't always move in straight lines. Sometimes it looped back, bringing answers in unexpected ways. As the night grew darker, she stood up. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me be here, not just next door, but in your life." He looked at her, feeling something warm and certain settle in his chest. "I'm glad you're here." And for the first time in a long while, he believed that giving up on something hadn't been an ending at all. It had been the beginning of something quietly meaningful, something worth protecting. The change did not happen all at once. It came slowly, in small moments that felt ordinary at first. A shared smile across the fence, a knock on the door with extra food she had made, a short walk that turned into a long conversation. None of it felt planned, yet each moment added something steady between them. He noticed that his evenings no longer felt empty. After work, instead of sitting alone with the television on low volume, he found himself checking the time, wondering if she might be outside. Sometimes she was. Sometimes she was. But even when she wasn't, the feeling of quiet no longer felt heavy. One evening, he heard soft music coming from next door. It was not loud, just enough to drift through the open window. The sound made him pause. It reminded him that someone else's life was unfolding just a few steps away. A life that now touched his in small but meaningful ways. Later that night, she knocked on his door. He opened it to find her holding a small bowl. "I made soup," she said. "Too much for one person." He smiled. "That happens to me more than I like to admit." They sat at his kitchen table, eating slowly. The soup was warm and simple, the kind that made you feel taken care of. They talked about their days, nothing dramatic, just honest details. A long meeting at work, a box she couldn't find the label for, a neighbor's dog that barked too much. At one point, she looked around his kitchen. "You keep things neat," she said. "I guess I do," he replied. "It's easier to think when things are in order," she nodded. "My grandmother was the same way. She said chaos outside creates chaos inside." He considered that. "She sounds wise." She was, Lena said, but she also knew when to let things be. As days turned into weeks, he began to notice how much he was learning, not just about her, but about himself. He realized how guarded he had been for years, how he had learned to keep his feelings quiet to avoid disappointment. With her, that guard felt less necessary. Still, he was careful. He didn't want to move too fast or place expectations on something that was still growing. Lena seemed to feel the same. She never pushed, never asked questions that felt too personal. She let things unfold naturally. One afternoon, they went for a longer walk than usual. The path led them to a small hill overlooking the edge of town. They sat on a bench, watching the clouds move slowly across the sky. "I used to think starting over meant running away," Lena said quietly. "Now I think it means choosing where you stand." He looked at her. "Do you feel like you chose right?" She took a moment before answering. "I do, even when it feels uncertain." He understood that feeling well. As they sat there, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement that made his heart race, but calm. A sense of being where he was meant to be without needing to prove anything. That night after they returned home, he lay awake longer than usual. He thought about how much his life had shifted in such a short time without any big decision or dramatic change. Just presence, just attention. The next weekend, she invited him to a small gathering at a local community center. There were people she had met through work and neighbors from nearby streets. He hesitated at first. Social gatherings were not his favorite, but he went. Watching her interact with others, he saw another side of her. She listened carefully, spoke thoughtfully, and treated everyone with the same quiet respect. She didn't try to stand out, yet people were drawn to her. At one point, someone asked how long they had known each other. He almost laughed at the question. It felt like both a short time and a long one. "Not very long," he said. "But long enough," Lena added, meeting his eyes. That simple sentence stayed with him. As the weeks continued, trust deepened. He shared stories he rarely told anyone. About times he felt he had failed, about choices he questioned. She listened without judgment, without trying to change the story. In return, she shared her own struggles, the feeling of carrying expectations, the fear of losing connection to her roots, the pressure to be strong when she sometimes felt tired. They learned how to sit with each other's truths, even when those truths were uncomfortable. One evening, a storm rolled in suddenly. Heavy rain fell, tapping against the windows. The power went out in the neighborhood. Darkness filled the house, broken only by flashes of lightning. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. Across the way, her porch light was out too. He saw her door open and closed quickly as she checked the breaker. "You okay?" he called out. "Yes," she replied. "Just surprised." He crossed over, standing under the shared edge of the porch roof as rain poured down. They laughed softly at the timing of it all. Inside, they lit a few candles. The house felt smaller, warmer. The storm outside made everything else feel distant. They sat on opposite ends of the couch at first, talking quietly. As the thunder softened, the silence grew comfortable. At some point, she shifted closer, not touching, just nearer. He was aware of the space between them and how easily it could disappear, but he didn't rush it. Neither did she. "I'm glad you didn't force things," she said softly, almost as if reading his thoughts. "So am I," he replied. That night, when the power returned and she went home, he realized something important. This connection was not built on sudden attraction or chance alone. It was built on patience, respect, and shared understanding. The next morning, he found a small note slipped under his door. "Thank you for last night, for the light and for the calm. L." He smiled, holding the note longer than necessary. He began to see how this relationship was changing him. He was more open at work, more present in conversations, more aware of the people around him. It felt like parts of him that had been quiet for years were slowly waking up. One evening, as they sat together watching the sun dip below the horizon, he spoke without planning to. "I used to think being alone was easier," he said. "Now I'm not so sure." She looked at him, her expression gentle. "Being alone can be safe," she said. "But sharing your life can be stronger," he nodded. "I think I'm starting to understand that." The air grew cool as night settled in. The streetlights flickered on one by one. Nothing dramatic happened that night. No big declarations, no promises made. But something solid had formed between them. A trust that felt earned. A connection that felt real. And deep down, he knew that whatever came next, this was no longer just a coincidence between neighbors. It was a choice they were both quietly making, day by day, to keep showing up. The realization came to him on an ordinary morning. There was no sudden moment, no loud thought, just a calm understanding that settled quietly in his chest. He was standing in his kitchen, making coffee, when he noticed the sunlight falling across the floor in a way that made the room feel warmer than usual. He looked toward the window that faced her house and smiled without thinking. Life had changed and it hadn't asked for permission. Later that day, he found her outside, sitting on the grass with a small plant pot beside her. She was digging carefully into the soil, her hands steady and patient. "Starting a garden?" he asked. She looked up, smiling. "Just a few plants. My grandmother believed you should always grow something where you live. It reminds you that you're staying." He nodded. "That makes sense." He sat beside her, not worrying about dirt on his clothes. They worked quietly for a while, passing tools back and forth, sharing small comments. The silence between them felt comfortable, like it belonged there. As the plant settled into the soil, she brushed her hands together and sighed softly. "I think this place finally feels like home," she said. He looked at her, really looked at her. "I'm glad." She met his eyes. "I'm glad too." That evening they cooked dinner together at her place. The kitchen was still simple, but it felt lived in now. They moved around each other easily, like they had done it many times before. He chopped vegetables while she stirred a pot on the stove. At one point she laughed at something he said, and the sound stayed with him. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was real. After dinner they sat on the porch, watching the sky fade from blue to deep orange. The neighborhood was quiet. A breeze moved gently through the trees. He took a breath. "I've been thinking a lot," he said. She turned toward him. "About what?" "About how close I came to missing this," he said honestly. "If that blind date had worked out, if I had stayed out longer, if I had gone anywhere else that night." She listened carefully, not interrupting. "I used to believe that if something didn't work, it meant I had failed," he continued. "Now I think it might just mean I was being redirected." She smiled softly. "My grandmother used to say that too," he chuckled. "She had a lot of wisdom." "She did," Lena said. "And she would have liked you." That meant more to him than he expected. As the days passed, their connection grew clearer. They didn't label it. They didn't rush it. They simply showed up for each other. When he had a long day, she noticed. When she felt overwhelmed, he listened. There was balance, not effort. One weekend, they took a short drive out of town. Nothing planned, just a road and time. They talked about dreams they had once put aside, about places they wanted to see, about fears they didn't always admit. "I used to think I had to have everything figured out," she said, watching the road ahead. "Now I think it's okay to learn as you go." He nodded. "I spent a lot of years waiting for the right time. Turns out it doesn't always announce itself." They stopped near a small overlook and sat quietly, looking out at the open land. He felt something settle into place, something solid and sure. That night back home, they stood outside her door. The porch light cast a soft glow around them. "I'm glad you're here," he said again, realizing how true the words felt every time. "So am I," she replied. This time when she reached for his hand, he didn't hesitate. The touch was gentle, respectful, and full of meaning. No rush, no pressure, just connection. Weeks turned into months. Seasons shifted. The plants she had grown began to thrive. So did they. Neighbors noticed. Friends noticed. But most importantly, he noticed the change in himself. He laughed more. He listened better. He felt present in his own life again. One evening, as they sat together after a long day, he said something that surprised even him. "I don't feel like I'm waiting anymore." She looked at him with curiosity. "Waiting for what?" "For life to start," he said. "I think it already has." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Sometimes it starts when you stop looking for it." He thought back to that night in the diner, the empty chair, the disappointment, the moment he gave up and decided the day was over. If he could speak to that version of himself now, he would tell him this. Endings are not always what they seem. Sometimes they are quiet doorways. Later that week, he found an old note tucked into a drawer. It was from years ago, something he had written to himself during a difficult time. It talked about patience, about trusting the road ahead even when it made no sense. He showed it to her. She read it slowly. "You already knew," she said. "You just needed time to remember." That night, under a sky full of stars, he felt complete in a way he hadn't before. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was honest. The blind date that never happened no longer felt like a loss. It felt like the reason he was exactly where he needed to be. Standing next to the woman who called out his name when he least expected it, he understood something simple and powerful. Giving up didn't mean he failed. It meant he finally made room for what was meant to stay.